stories, secrets that should never have seen the light of day. Among them, the Lambert plantation stood out not only for its vast expanse, but for the impeccable reputation of its owning family. What happened on this property during the winter of 1846 defies any human understanding. A terrible discovery about blood ties triggered a sequence of events so disturbing that local authorities did everything to bury the truth along with the bodies. Official documents were altered, witnesses silenced, and one of the most shocking tragedies in American history was erased from the records. The story I'm going to tell today is one of the most disturbing I've ever heard about family secrets and forbidden love. It's a narrative that reveals how buried truths can resurface to destroy entire generations, and how some revelations are too heavy to be borne. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Now, let's discover together the secrets that the Lambert family tried to bury forever. The Lambert plantation had been established in 1798 by Donovan Lambert, an English immigrant who arrived in South Carolina with grand ambitions and few moral scruples. For nearly 5 decades, he built an agricultural empire based on rice and cotton cultivation, using the labor of more than 200 slaves. His exceptional brutality was known far beyond the boundaries of his property. A man who saw his slaves as absolute property, without any consideration for their humanity. In 1845, at age 72, Donovan Lambert died of natural causes, leaving the plantation to his only legitimate son, Craig Lambert. Craig, then 28 years old, had been educated at the finest schools in the North and returned to the South with ideas slightly more progressive than his father's. He assumed control of the property by implementing some improvements in the slaves' living conditions, not out of genuine compassion, but because he believed healthier workers were more productive. The main house was an imposing 2-story structure, built in Georgian style. The interior was decorated with furniture imported from Europe, demonstrating the wealth accumulated by the family over decades of exploitation. During the first months after taking over the property, Craig noticed a young slave who worked in the main house. Lorena, as she was known, was 19 years old and possessed a striking presence that distinguished her from the other domestic workers. There was something in her eyes, a sharp intelligence and natural dignity that persisted despite her condition, that drew attention. Lorena had arrived at the plantation as a child, sold by a slave trader from Charleston when she was only 8 years old. She grew up working in the main house, learning the most refined domestic tasks under the supervision of Estella Lambert, Craig's mother. Estella Lambert was a 58-year-old woman, widowed since Donovan's death. She had married young to a much older man and spent decades living under his oppressive shadow. Although she maintained the social conventions of her time, her husband's death had relieved some of the constant pressure under which she lived. The attraction between Craig and Lorena developed during the autumn of 1845. Their initial interactions were professional, but gradually evolved into more personal conversations. Craig discovered that Lorena had a unique way of seeing the world based on her experiences and natural observations, a perceptiveness he rarely encountered. Estella observed this development with growing concern. She recognized the signs of a budding romantic interest and feared the consequences. Relationships between masters and slaves were common, but rarely ended well for any of the parties involved. During the winter of 1845, Craig began visiting Lorena in her quarters at the back of the main house, initially under professional pretexts, but gradually for more personal reasons. Lorena found herself in an impossible position. As a slave, she had no power to refuse Craig's attentions, but she also couldn't deny that she felt a genuine connection with him. The other slaves in the main house began to notice Craig's frequent visits. Discreet whispers circulated among them, but no one dared comment openly about the situation. The rigid hierarchy of the plantation kept everyone silent. Estella tried to intervene discreetly, creating obstacles to the meetings and talking to Craig about the improprieties of his behavior, but her efforts were largely ignored. Craig had convinced himself that his feelings for Lorena were genuine and that she reciprocated voluntarily, ignoring the power dynamics that made any true consent impossible. During the spring of 1846, the relationship became physically intimate. Lorena became pregnant in May, a discovery that brought joy and terror in equal measures. Craig was euphoric at the prospect of having a child, while Lorena understood the dangerous implications of her situation. The pregnancy was kept secret, known only to Craig, Estella, and Mammy Eliza, an older slave who served as the plantation's midwife. Mammy Eliza was 58 years old and possessed natural authority among the slaves, based on her experience and wisdom accumulated over decades. She had arrived at the plantation at age 18 and witnessed all the Lambert family secrets. Craig began making grandiose plans, talking about freeing Lorena and recognizing the child as his own. His romantic fantasies completely ignored the legal and social realities that made such plans practically impossible in South Carolina in 1846. State laws explicitly prohibited the legal recognition of children born from relationships between masters and slaves. During the summer, the pregnancy became more visible. Craig created an elaborate story about Lorena needing special medical care, justifying her more frequent presence in the main house. The situation created tensions when other slaves began to suspect the true nature of the relationship. During the final months of pregnancy, Lorena developed complications that worried Mammy Eliza. The young woman was under extreme emotional stress, torn between her confused feelings for Craig and the understanding that her situation was fundamentally dangerous. Mammy Eliza had served the Lambert family for 40 years. For decades, she had been forced to remain silent about the abuses she witnessed, including the frequent rapes that Donovan committed against young slave women. Among the darkest secrets that Mammy Eliza kept was knowledge about Lorena's birth. She had assisted at the birth of Sarah, a young slave who died during the birth of her daughter in 1827. The child was clearly Donovan Lambert's daughter, evidenced by her facial features and other signs of kinship. Mammy Eliza had cared for Lorena during her early years on the plantation, observing how Donovan showed unusual attention to the child. When Lorena was 8 years old, in 1835, Donovan ordered that she be sold to a Charleston trader, claiming he wanted to clean the property of evidence of his indiscretions. Lorena's return to the plantation years later had been arranged by Donovan himself, shortly before his death in 1845. He had brought the young woman back through an intermediary without revealing his motivations to Estella or Craig. Not even he seemed fully conscious of the true reason behind his decision. Perhaps a distorted paternal impulse, or simply the desire to recover property he considered valuable. Throughout the development of the relationship between Craig and Lorena, Mammy Eliza watched with growing anguish, knowing they were half-siblings, but unable to reveal the truth without exposing decades of family secrets. She hoped the relationship would end naturally, but Lorena's pregnancy made the situation impossible to ignore. The month of September 1846 brought a tense atmosphere of expectation to the Lambert plantation. Lorena was in the final stages of her pregnancy, and Craig had become increasingly anxious and protective, spending hours beside her, reading aloud and making plans for the child's future. Estella observed the situation with growing unease, although she still didn't understand the true nature of what was about to unfold. Mammy Eliza prepared for the birth with anguish that went far beyond her normal medical concerns. She knew she was about to assist at the birth of a child conceived through incest. During the second week of September, Lorena began having premature contractions that alarmed everyone involved. Mammy Eliza determined that the baby was trying to be born almost a month early, a dangerous situation for both Lorena and the child. Craig panicked, insisting on calling a doctor from Charleston, but Estella convinced him that this would create a scandal that would destroy the family's reputation. They would have to trust Mammy Eliza's experience. The labor lasted almost 24 hours, an agonizing period during which Craig remained in the hallway. During the first hours, Lorena screamed in pain in a way that echoed through the main house and alarmed the other slaves. Estella remained in the room with Lorena, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement, completely unaware of the terrible knowledge that Mammy Eliza carried. As the labor progressed, Mammy Eliza began to notice worrying signs. The baby's position wasn't correct, and Lorena was losing more blood than normal. During the early morning hours, when the birth finally progressed to the final stages, Mammy Eliza made a discovery that confirmed her worst fears. When the baby's head appeared, she could immediately see that the child presented anomalies. The baby was born with malformations that shocked even Mammy Eliza, who had assisted hundreds of births. The child had irregular facial features, partially developed limbs, and other anomalies that made its appearance disturbing. The skull presented an abnormal shape, and the arms and legs showed incomplete development. Mammy Eliza recognized the signs. She had seen similar deformities on other rare occasions. Her heart filled with guilt, knowing she could have prevented this tragedy if she had found the courage to reveal the truth before. Lorena, exhausted from the prolonged labor, initially didn't notice the deformities. She asked to hold the baby, but Mammy Eliza hesitated, looking to Estella for guidance. When Lorena finally saw her son, her reaction was one of shock. She screamed and tried to get away from the child, refusing to believe she had given birth to something so deformed. Craig, hearing the renewed screams, forced his way into the room. When he saw the child, he was paralyzed, unable to understand how this had happened. The child lived only a few hours after birth. Its deformities were so severe that it couldn't breathe properly or feed. Craig remained in the room during the final hours of his son's life, holding the deformed child and trying to find some trace of beauty in its distorted features. When the child finally died, Craig insisted on holding a proper funeral despite Estella's objections. He commissioned a small oak coffin, made by the plantation's carpenter, and personally chose a location in the slave cemetery where the child would be buried. The funeral was a simple ceremony, but Craig read biblical passages about innocence and redemption, his words echoing through the silent mourning. In the days following the funeral, Craig developed a routine that alarmed Estella. He visited the child's grave every morning at dawn, remaining kneeling for hours while murmuring prayers and promises. His visits frequently lasted more than 2 hours, during which he spoke to the dead child as if it could hear him. During the day, he isolated himself in his office, becoming meticulous in documenting every aspect of the tragedy through notes where he recorded his theories about the possible causes of the deformities. His speculations included environmental influences, divine curses, and hereditary defects, but he didn't possess sufficient knowledge to understand the true cause. Craig had become anxious for scientific explanations, writing letters to doctors in Charleston and Savannah. His correspondence was detailed and anguished, minutely describing every aspect of the deformities and begging for answers about congenital malformations. He sent several letters during the weeks following the birth, but didn't receive satisfactory responses. The medicine of the era didn't offer adequate explanations for such cases. Lorena entered a state of profound melancholy, refusing to speak or eat properly, remaining lying with her eyes fixed on the ceiling. She constantly murmured about divine punishment and unconfessed sins, while Estella tried to care for her without understanding the source of her apparent guilt. Mammy Eliza observed everyone's suffering while carrying the burden of her secret knowledge. She knew exactly why the child had been born deformed, but revealing the truth would mean exposing decades of family secrets and potentially destroying what remained of the Lambert family. During a particularly difficult night, when Craig directly confronted Estella demanding answers about the possible causes of the tragedy, Mammy Eliza made a decision that would change everything. She could no longer bear to see the family destroy itself in ignorance when she possessed the answers they sought. Mammy Eliza sought out Estella privately and, with great reluctance, began to reveal the secrets she had kept for decades. She told about Donovan's abuses, about Lorena's birth, and about the true identity of the young woman Craig had taken as a lover. The revelation hit Estella like lightning. She initially refused to believe, but Mammy Eliza provided specific details that couldn't be contested. She described Lorena's birth, her mother Sarah's death, and the circumstances of her sale as a child. Estella immediately understood the devastating implications of the revelation. Craig had become romantically involved with his own half-sister, and the deformed child was a direct result of this consanguineous union. The understanding made her physically ill. Mammy Eliza begged Estella to keep the secret, arguing that revealing the truth would only cause more suffering. But Estella found herself in an impossible moral dilemma. She possessed the answers Craig sought, but these answers could completely destroy his sanity. The pressure of maintaining this terrible knowledge began to affect Estella immediately. She developed insomnia, loss of appetite, and constant anxiety that left her unable to function normally. Craig noticed the change in her behavior and began to suspect she was hiding important information. During a particularly intense conversation with Craig, Estella almost revealed the truth, but managed to control herself at the last moment. However, she realized she couldn't keep the secret much longer. The pressure was becoming unbearable. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the unfolding of this disturbing story. In the next chapters, we'll discover how this terrible revelation will completely destroy the Lambert family. The month of October 1846 brought a perceptible change to the Lambert plantation. Estella carried the overwhelming burden of the knowledge that Mammy Eliza had shared with her, struggling daily with the decision of whether or not to reveal the truth to Craig. Craig continued his search for answers about his dead son's deformities. He had written several letters to doctors, but the few responses he received were vague and unsatisfactory. The medicine of 1846 didn't offer adequate explanations for severe congenital malformations, leaving Craig even more frustrated. Lorena remained in extreme emotional fragility. She had developed a prayer routine, spending hours kneeling in her room, murmuring pleas for forgiveness and purification. Her physical appearance had deteriorated significantly since the traumatic birth, and she frequently refused to eat. Estella observed Craig and Lorena's suffering, knowing she possessed the answers that could explain the tragedy, but fearing the devastating consequences of revealing them. The burden of the secret was destroying her own mental health. During a particularly cold October morning, Estella finally made the decision that had tormented her for weeks. She could no longer bear to see Craig destroy himself, searching for answers she possessed. She called Craig for a private conversation in her office, where they could speak without being heard. Craig entered the office with high expectations, hoping his mother would finally provide some useful information about the possible causes of the tragedy. He wasn't prepared for what he was about to receive. Estella began her revelation hesitantly, explaining that Mammy Eliza had shared with her information about Lorena's past that she had kept secret for decades. She spoke about how Mammy Eliza knew family secrets that dated from long before Craig's birth. With great difficulty, Estella revealed that Lorena wasn't just a common slave, but had a direct connection to the Lambert family that made her relationship with Craig deeply problematic. She explained that Lorena was, in fact, Donovan Lambert's daughter, making her Craig's half-sister. The revelation hit Craig like a devastating blow. His body reacted immediately to the shock. He began to tremble, his hands shaking. Cold sweat covered his forehead while his breathing became irregular and gasping. He gripped the office desk to keep from collapsing, his knees giving way under the impact of the truth. Craig initially refused to believe, claiming his mother was being deceived by false information from Mammy Eliza. The idea that he had become romantically involved with his own sister was impossible to accept. His words came out broken, his voice failing as he tried to form coherent arguments against the revelation. Estella provided the details that Mammy Eliza had shared with her. She explained how Mammy Eliza had assisted at Lorena's birth in 1827, how Lorena's mother had died during childbirth, and how Donovan had ordered the child to be sold when she was 8 years old to hide evidence of his paternity. The gradual understanding of the truth brought a wave of nausea that left Craig physically ill. He vomited violently in Estella's office, his body rejecting reality as much as his mind. The extent of his actions became clear in a devastating way. Craig began to connect the dots agonizingly. His son's severe deformities now made terrible sense. They were the direct result of the consanguineous relationship between him and Lorena. The child had paid the price for the sins they had committed unconsciously. The revelation also explained why Mammy Eliza had seemed so anguished during the pregnancy and birth. She had known from the beginning that the child would be cursed by the circumstances of its conception, but had been unable to prevent the tragedy without revealing secrets she had kept for decades. While Craig struggled to accept the revelation, the plantation's routine began to reflect the tension that permeated the main house. The slaves noticed that work in the fields was being supervised inconsistently, with Craig frequently absent from his responsibilities. Productivity decreased visibly, and the overseers had to assume more authority to maintain order. Craig demanded to know why Estella had kept this information secret, even if only for a few weeks. He accused her of allowing him to continue suffering in ignorance when she possessed the answers he sought. His anger was fueled by both guilt and shock. Estella explained that she had discovered the truth only recently through Mammy Eliza's revelation. She had struggled with the decision of whether to tell or not, fearing that the truth could completely destroy his sanity. Her hesitation had been motivated by love and concern, not malice. The discussion between mother and son became intense, with Craig alternating between anger directed at Estella and revulsion directed at himself. He couldn't decide whether to blame his mother for not revealing the truth immediately or for revealing it now. Craig left the office in a state of profound shock, wandering the property for hours, avoiding contact with Lorena or anyone else while trying to understand the extent of the situation. During the following days, Craig entered a severe melancholy that left him practically non-functional. He refused to eat properly, slept very little, and spent hours staring at nothing. Estella tried to care for him, but he rejected any attempt at consolation. Lorena, unaware of the revelation, noticed the dramatic change in Craig's behavior. She tried to approach him to offer comfort, but he avoided her completely, unable to look at her without feeling nausea. Craig's avoidance confused and deeply hurt Lorena. She interpreted his behavior as rejection related to their son's death, not understanding that there were much deeper and more disturbing reasons for his change in attitude. Craig began obsessively reviewing his relationship with Lorena, reinterpreting every intimate moment through the terrible lens of his new understanding. Memories that had once been precious now became sources of revulsion. During a particularly difficult night, Craig confronted Estella again, this time demanding to know if Lorena was aware of her true identity. When Estella confirmed that Lorena didn't know she was Donovan's daughter, Craig entered a new level of anguish. The idea that Lorena was innocent of any knowledge about the incest made the situation even more agonizing for Craig. He had destroyed his own sister's life without her even knowing they were related. The guilt became overwhelming. Craig began to consider revealing the truth to Lorena, but Estella begged him not to do so. She argued that Lorena had already suffered enough with the loss of the child and that the additional revelation could destroy her completely. The discussion about whether or not to reveal the truth to Lorena created a new source of conflict between Craig and Estella. Craig felt that Lorena had the right to know, while Estella believed that some truths were too heavy to be shared. During this period, Craig developed a fixation with the idea of redemption and punishment. He spent hours reading biblical passages about incest and sin, seeking some form of expiation for his involuntary but devastating acts. The month of November 1846 arrived at the Lambert plantation loaded with tension. Craig had spent weeks in profound melancholy, alternating between moments of furious denial and agonizing acceptance of the truth about his relationship with Lorena. Estella's revelation had created an irreparable fracture in the family dynamic. Craig could no longer look at Lorena without feeling a toxic mixture of love, revulsion, and self-condemnation. Every memory of their previous intimacy now filled him with nausea and overwhelming guilt. Lorena, still unaware of the true reason behind the dramatic change in Craig's behavior, had developed her own disturbing coping mechanisms. She spent hours preparing baby clothes, as if expecting her dead child to somehow return. Her hands worked meticulously on small garments, embroidering delicate details while humming lullabies to a son who would never hear her voice again. Craig had become obsessive about documenting his feelings. He constantly wrote in a diary, recording his internal struggle and his plans to find some form of redemption or escape. His notes revealed a deteriorating mind, alternating between rational analyses of his situation and ramblings about divine punishment and expiation. During this period, Craig developed a disturbing fixation with the idea that he and Lorena could somehow purify their relationship through suffering and penance. He spoke about moving to a remote location where they could live as siblings, denying any romantic aspect of their past. His plans were vague and unrealistic, but offered a fantasy of escape from unbearable reality. Lorena interpreted Craig's strange comments about purification and new life as signs that he was planning a renewed future for them. She didn't understand that his words were motivated by revulsion and guilt, not love or hope. In her innocence, she saw these comments as promises that they would overcome the tragedy of losing their son. Craig's health continued to deteriorate in visible and alarming ways. He had lost significant weight, developed hand tremors, and begun talking to himself during his walks around the property. The slaves began to avoid him, fearing he was going mad. Whispers circulated among them about the young master, who spoke to ghosts and cried over empty graves. Estella, trying to help her son, attempted various strategies to ease his suffering. She organized visits from Craig's old friends from the north, hoping that familiar company could distract him from his obsession. When that failed, she tried to convince him to travel to Charleston for a few weeks, arguing that a change of environment could help his recovery. Estella even considered calling a doctor to examine Craig, but feared this could expose the family's secrets. Her attempts to create normal routines, regular meals, social activities, plantation responsibilities, were systematically rejected by Craig, who seemed determined to isolate himself completely from the world. During a particularly difficult night, Craig confronted Estella with a shocking proposal. He wanted to tell Lorena the truth about her identity, believing that only through complete confession could they find some form of peace or redemption. His eyes shone with feverish intensity as he explained his distorted logic. Estella begged Craig to reconsider, arguing that Lorena had already suffered enough trauma with the loss of the deformed child. She feared that the additional revelation could completely destroy the young woman's sanity, who already showed signs of emotional instability. Estella painted terrible scenarios of what could happen if Lorena discovered the truth. Craig, however, had convinced himself that keeping the secret was a form of moral cowardice. He argued that Lorena had the right to know her true identity, and that only through complete truth could they find some form of expiation. His logic was influenced by religious readings about confession and penance. The discussion between mother and son became increasingly intense, with Estella using every possible argument to dissuade Craig from his decision. She pointed out that the revelation wouldn't change the past, but would only create more suffering in the present. She begged him to consider Lorena's well-being above his own need for absolution. Craig, however, had developed a distorted logic where suffering was seen as necessary for purification. He believed that both he and Lorena needed to face the complete truth of their acts to be able to find some form of spiritual redemption. His religious convictions had become extreme and dangerous. During this period of conflict, Lorena continued her disturbing activities related to preparing for a future baby. She organized and reorganized infant clothes, spoke about when the next one comes, and demonstrated behaviors that suggested a growing disconnection from reality. She had created a fantasy world where her dead child would return or be replaced. Craig observed Lorena's behavior with a mixture of tenderness and revulsion. He wanted to console her and explain why they could never have another child, but couldn't find words that wouldn't reveal the truth about their relationship. Every interaction became torture for him. The tension in the main house had become palpable to all residents. Mammy Eliza, who had revealed the truth to Estella, observed the developments with growing regret. She wondered if she had done the right thing by breaking decades of silence, seeing how the knowledge was destroying the family she had served for so long. Craig had begun to develop specific plans to reveal the truth to Lorena. He mentally rehearsed how he would approach the subject, what words he would use, and how he would try to minimize the trauma of the revelation. His plans were naive and inadequate for the complexity of the situation, but he was determined to move forward. Craig's obsession with confession was affecting his ability to function normally. He neglected his responsibilities on the plantation, avoided social contact, and spent hours in somber contemplation about sin, punishment, and redemption. The plantation began to suffer under his absent leadership. Estella realized she couldn't dissuade Craig indefinitely. His determination to reveal the truth to Lorena seemed to be strengthening each day, fueled by his growing guilt and his search for some form of moral absolution. She began to prepare for the inevitable. During a November morning, Craig finally made the decision to act. He informed Estella that he would reveal the truth to Lorena that very day, regardless of her objections. His resolution was firm and apparently unshakable, his eyes showing a determination that frightened Estella. Estella made one last desperate attempt to change Craig's mind, offering alternatives like sending Lorena away from the plantation or creating a story that would explain why they could no longer have a romantic relationship. Craig rejected all suggestions, insisting that only complete truth could free them. Craig's determination to reveal the truth created an atmosphere of inevitability in the main house. Estella knew that events were about to take a turn that could completely destroy what remained of her family. She prepared for the devastating consequences that would surely come. The end of November 1846 brought with it an atmosphere of inevitability that seemed to weigh over the entire Lambert plantation like a shroud. Craig had become a somber figure, wandering the property with the distant gaze of someone fighting internal demons that no one else could see or understand. The mental pressure he faced since Estella's revelation had reached a critical point. For 3 weeks, he had alternated between furious denial and moments of agonizing acceptance of the truth. This internal battle was destroying his sanity in a visible and irreversible way. Lorena continued unaware of the true nature of her situation, but her anxiety had transformed into constant terror. She avoided Craig whenever possible, hiding in the most remote corners of the main house. Her nightmares had become so intense that she frequently woke up screaming, alerting the entire house to her suffering. Estella observed the deterioration of both with growing anguish. The truth that had been revealed was consuming her family from within, and she felt powerless to prevent the tragedy approaching like an inevitable storm. During this period, Lorena had discovered she was pregnant again. The revelation filled her simultaneously with joy and terror. Joy at the possibility of replacing the lost child, terror from the memories of the deformity that had marked the first birth. She kept the pregnancy secret, fearing Craig's reaction and not understanding why he had become so distant and disturbed. The obsessive preparation of baby clothes and her constant reference to the next one finally made sense. Lorena wasn't just dealing with grief, she was preparing for a new child that was already growing in her womb. Her anxiety about the pregnancy mixed with the trauma of the previous loss, creating an increasingly fragile mental state. Craig's final breakdown occurred during a cold November morning when he found Lorena preparing more baby clothes in the room that had belonged to the dead child. The sight of her carefully organizing small garments, combined with her slightly different appearance, aroused suspicions in his mind. Craig confronted Lorena with an intensity that terrified her. He demanded to know why she was preparing for another baby, if she was hiding something from him. His voice carried a mixture of anger and anguish she had never heard before. Under pressure, Lorena finally admitted she was pregnant again. The confirmation of the pregnancy hit Craig like lightning. His mind, already tortured by the truth about their kinship, couldn't accept the idea that they would repeat the same terrible mistake. The prospect of another cursed child filled him with absolute dread. Lorena, confused and frightened by Craig's violent reaction, tried to console him by saying that this time would be different, that the child would be born healthy. Her innocence about the true nature of their situation only intensified Craig's agony, who knew she didn't understand what they were about to repeat. The revelation came out of Craig like a desperate confession. He told Lorena that she was his sister, daughter of the same father as him. He explained that the child they had lost was the product of a union that should never have happened, and that the new child would be equally cursed. His words came out broken, mixed with sobs and uncontrollable tremors. Lorena reacted to the revelation with absolute shock. She initially refused to believe, claiming Craig was lying or going mad. But when he provided specific details about her childhood, about her sale as a child, about the circumstances of her birth, she began to understand the devastating truth. Understanding reality hit Lorena like a physical blow. She entered a state of panic that made her vomit violently, her body rejecting the truth as much as her mind. She screamed that it was impossible, that God wouldn't allow such an abomination, that there had to be some mistake. Craig, seeing the shock in her eyes, tried to console her, but his own guilt and anguish made his efforts useless. He had destroyed the only person he loved by revealing the truth that should have remained buried forever. His attempt at comfort only intensified Lorena's panic. Lorena fled the room in total affliction, running through the corridors like a tormented soul. She screamed about purification and sin, words that echoed through the walls and alerted the entire property that something terrible had happened. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the cursed child was growing. Estella found Lorena in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, digging with her own hands as if trying to bury herself alive. She murmured prayers and begged God for forgiveness for sins she didn't know she had committed. Her mind had broken under the impact of the revelation and the dread of carrying another child of incest. During the following days, Lorena entered a state of profound melancholy that left her practically catatonic. She refused to eat, speak, or leave her room. When forced to interact, she only repeated that she was dirty and that she needed to clean the bad blood growing inside her. Craig, devastated by Lorena's reaction, entered his own mental collapse. He had destroyed the only source of happiness in his life by revealing a truth she couldn't bear. His guilt transformed into an obsession with finding a way to fix what he had broken. The situation reached a new level of affliction when Lorena, in a moment of terrible lucidity, sought out Mammy Eliza. She begged the older woman for help, explaining that she carried a cursed child and needed to get rid of it before it was born deformed like the previous one. Mammy Eliza, immediately understanding what Lorena was asking, initially refused. She knew that preparing abortive remedies was dangerous, especially for a woman in such a fragile mental state. But Lorena's affliction was so intense that she eventually gave in. Mammy Eliza prepared a mixture of herbs she knew, plants that slave women used secretly when they couldn't bear to bring more children into slavery. She warned Lorena about the risks and pain that would come. Lorena consumed the mixture prepared by Mammy Eliza without hesitation, determined to get rid of the child she saw as an abomination. The remedy caused her intense pain and bleeding, but she endured everything with a determination that frightened even Mammy Eliza. Craig discovered what had happened when he found Lorena writhing in pain in her room, with blood staining her clothes. Mammy Eliza, forced to explain, revealed that Lorena had taken remedies to get rid of the child. The revelation hit Craig like a death sentence for any hope of redemption. The discovery that Lorena had aborted their child by her own choice unleashed Craig's final fury. He saw this as a complete rejection not only of him, but of any possibility of correcting past mistakes. His mind, already broken, finally shattered completely. Craig confronted Lorena in her room during a stormy November night. He demanded to know why she had done this, why she had killed their son, why she had destroyed any chance of them finding a way to move forward. His anger was fueled by both guilt and anguish, his words coming out as furious accusations. Lorena, still weak from the effects of the abortion, tried to explain that she couldn't allow another cursed child to come into the world. She said she would rather die than give birth to another monster as a result of their sin. Her words were like stabs to Craig's already wounded heart, confirming his worst fears about how she now saw him. The argument between Craig and Lorena escalated to something Estella could hear from downstairs. Muffled screams and the sound of furniture being knocked over echoed through the main house for several minutes, followed by a sudden and disturbing silence that deeply alarmed her. Estella climbed the stairs with growing apprehension, calling for both without getting an answer. The second-floor hallway was in absolute silence, but she could feel that something terrible had happened. The room door was ajar, revealing only darkness. When Estella pushed the door and entered the room, the scene she found left her paralyzed. Lorena lay on the floor in a pool of blood, her head at an impossible angle against the stone wall. The room showed clear signs of violent struggle, with overturned furniture and scattered objects. Craig was kneeling beside the body, holding a revolver with trembling hands. His face was covered with tears and blood, his eyes completely disconnected from reality. He stared fixedly at Lorena, as if he couldn't understand what had happened. Estella tried to approach, calling her son's name, but Craig raised the revolver toward her with a sudden movement. He murmured incoherent words about sin and redemption, about not being able to live with what he had done. His voice was unrecognizable, distorted by madness. Before Estella could react or try to stop him, Craig turned the gun on himself. The shot echoed through the main house like thunder, and Craig's body collapsed beside Lorena. Estella was left alone in the room, surrounded by the bodies of her children, unable to accept the extent of the tragedy. Estella remained motionless for several minutes, looking at Craig and Lorena's bodies in absolute shock. The silence that followed the shot was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own irregular breathing and the sobs that began to escape from her throat. The room told a story of violence. Lorena had been pushed forcefully against the stone wall of the fireplace, the fatal impact breaking her neck instantly. Marks on her arms indicated she had been grabbed brutally before the fall. The position of her body and the angle of her head confirmed that death had been immediate. Craig had used his father's revolver, a weapon that Donovan kept in his bedside table and that Craig had kept as a memento. The shot had been accurate, piercing his right temple and instantly ending his suffering. Estella found evidence of the abortion that had occurred days before, blood-stained clothes hidden under the bed, confirming that Lorena had undergone significant physical trauma recently. These findings helped explain the deteriorated mental state of both in recent days. The room also revealed signs of Craig's obsession with the situation. Torn pages from religious books were scattered across the floor, some with notes about sin and punishment written in trembling ink. His Bible was open to passages about incest and divine condemnation, with several passages violently underlined. Mammy Eliza was the first to arrive at the room, attracted by Estella's screams. When she saw the scene, she immediately understood that the tragedy she had feared from the beginning had finally been consummated. She helped Estella move away from the bodies and go down to the lower floor. During the following hours, Estella tried to accept what she had witnessed. She understood that the revelation of the truth about the kinship had triggered a sequence of events that led to the total destruction of her family. Her decision to tell Craig had become the cause of an unimaginable tragedy. The county sheriff, William Hartwell, was called the next morning. He had known the Lambert family for decades and was determined to protect their posthumous reputation. His investigation was superficial, more interested in covering up the scandal than discovering the complete truth. Hartwell briefly examined the scene, noted the positions of the bodies, and heard Estella's basic account of finding Craig and Lorena dead. He didn't ask questions about the circumstances that led to the tragedy, satisfied to classify the events as a murder followed by suicide, motivated by temporary mental imbalance. The official report described the events as the result of temporary mental imbalance on Craig's part. No mention was made of incest, the deformed child, or the circumstances that led to the final tragedy. The truth was buried along with the bodies, sealed by a silent pact between Estella, Mammy Eliza, and the sheriff. Craig and Lorena were buried in separate cemeteries, Craig in the Lambert family cemetery, Lorena in the slave cemetery where their first child already rested. Even in death, the social conventions of the time kept the half-siblings separated, perpetuating the division that had defined their lives. Craig's funeral was a formal ceremony attended by prominent county families who came to offer their condolences to Estella. No one questioned the circumstances of his death, accepting the official version that it had been an episode of temporary madness. The local reverend spoke about the fragility of the human mind and the mysteries of divine designs. Lorena's burial was a simple ceremony, attended only by Mammy Eliza and some plantation slaves. She was placed in a simple grave, near that of her child, without a headstone or marking indicating her identity. Her life and death were reduced to anonymity, as if she had never existed. Estella lived only 6 more months after witnessing her children's deaths. The trauma of seeing Craig kill himself before her eyes, combined with the overwhelming guilt of having caused the entire tragedy, destroyed her will to live. She died in her sleep during a spring night in 1847, some say of a broken heart. During her final months, Estella rarely left her room. She refused to receive visitors and spent hours looking out the window toward the cemeteries where her children were buried. Mammy Eliza cared for her, but Estella had lost any interest in living. She frequently murmured requests for forgiveness, as if conversing with invisible ghosts. The Lambert plantation was sold after Estella's death, passing to a family of merchants from Savannah called Morrison. The new owners never knew about the tragedy that had occurred within its walls, but reported an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to permeate the main house from the first day. The Morrison family tried to renovate the property but faced inexplicable difficulties. Workers refused to remain in the main house after nightfall, reporting strange sounds and a constant sensation of being watched. Tools mysteriously disappeared, and several workers reported vivid nightmares after sleeping on the property. After only 2 years, the Morrisons sold the property at a significant loss, claiming that the land was cursed. They never publicly revealed the strange events that forced them to leave, but whispers about the Lambert plantation